That's a good part of the project that you can just come and contribute. And that's why actually there are so many people that contribute.
I mean, I have to say, there is something cute and amazing about the passion for... I think it's only developers with passion that can be like, yeah, I'm just going to spend all my free time on keeping types for everybody. You know, it's... I can see it being rewarding and relaxing at the same time.
I actually introduced Flow to the project. I didn't add TypeScript. Yeah, I was like, I don't want to be this guy that, I'm with the TypeScript guy, so you will use TypeScript. I investigated, thought that Flow is better at this point. It probably was. Like, I think my decision back then was okay.
You said that early on TypeScript, like the core concept of TypeScript, and I never thought about it this way, was that it was providing definition files to existing code, letting you enhance that code with types. Is this the correct way to think about TypeScript from the mental model perspective, like you said? Or like that was just how it all started?
It's actually more how it ended, because to remind you, if you're mentioning 2016, to tell you what happened in 2012. So the situation with JavaScript is pretty dire. At this point, I think ES5 was released, and this is like the most minor release you could think of. 10 years after the previous release, it's such a minor release, and I know I definitely was thinking, oh man, if this is the language I will be using, it better move faster than what's happening.
React Universe on Air, your go-to podcast for all things cross-platform. Hello everybody, my name is Mike, I'm CTO and founder at Callstack, and today with me is a very special guest that works with me at Callstack, Boris. Boris, nice to meet you in person, let's say, and I'm super excited for this podcast today.
Nice to meet you.
Cool, yeah, so the title for today's coffee talk is pretty, I would say, unexpected. It is the story behind DefinitelyTyped, and we're going to talk about everything TypeScript related. And I guess for people, DefinitelyTyped may seem like something they know or they don't, but for sure they know those packages from NPM that start with the add types. So Boris, I'm very interested about your background and how it all started, and how did you even get involved in TypeScript? I think that's been like 8 years ago, so we are due for a bit of history.
Oh yeah. It's a very historic topic because it has been so long ago. Actually, I had to revisit a lot of the information to remember what I would say, and it turns out it's actually from 2012, so more than 12 years ago. Very long time ago, yeah. So I am developer, I'm developer. It would be very weird if I wasn't to be involved in TypeScript, but also back then I was coding since I was 9-10 years old, so even back then I was very deep into coding. And to tell you some dates, because I read them. So TypeScript was released on October 1st, 2012. That's version 0.8, the first public version. And DefinitelyTyped, the first commit, is 5 days later. So I guess we'll go into details why so fast, but yeah, it's actually very long.
First mover's advantage, I guess. I mean, that's why my very first question to you is like, how did you find out about TypeScript, and how did it happen so that 5 days later you were already sitting on this project?
Yeah, so for some people TypeScript might be more of a new thing because now it's very established, but previously, because it's coming from Microsoft, everything that comes from Microsoft is a little bit more towards people that are already in the Microsoft ecosystem, and other people are very skeptical. That's actually something to be noted. Back then, TypeScript was not just a super success immediately. People were, we don't need types. We don't need JavaScript. Most people didn't even want to write JavaScript, But I was doing a lot of C# before that, so I was very familiar with what's coming from Microsoft. And I was doing already a lot of JavaScript. I was front-end developer. Like I decided, okay, so this front-end development will be big, hopefully. And all people that are doing JavaScript are just hackers, kind of. Like there is still nothing serious there. So there's an opportunity. And I was doing a lot of JavaScript and I wasn't loving it. I hoped that Microsoft just make C# compile to JavaScript and call it a day, And yeah, when they announced TypeScript, it was kind of clear that it's a good idea. Like, it wasn't clear if it will be a big idea in the future, but it was clear it's a good idea. I just, literally, they announced it. I tried it out the first day immediately. And honestly, it was obvious what's missing. It is giving you types, but there are a ton of libraries that exist out there, and none of them have types because they're in JavaScript. So the very missing part is actually types for these libraries. And what Microsoft actually have added, obviously in anticipating that, was that they have created these definition files that are external to the libraries that you can just add somewhere, somehow. You can write them yourself, and they add types to JavaScript libraries. And that was the mechanism to actually be in the typed world, kind of.
That's interesting you mentioned it. I mean, I have so many questions, but the first one, I guess, would be when I was working with React Native, that was back in 2016, I am 80 to 90% sure that I haven't heard about TypeScript back then. I think I only learned about TypeScript sometime, year after starting React Native, so maybe 2016-ish. And obviously, React Native was a Flow-based framework back then. And for the readers, Flow is sort of Facebook's way to provide types for JavaScript, which is sort of totally different, I guess, from the conceptual perspective than TypeScript. And it is also OCaml-based. So I guess that adds another layer of complexity when it comes to contributing to it. And I'm sure you had a lot of discussions early on. And I don't know if you know the sort of motivation behind TypeScript and why it was TypeScript maybe instead of Flow put to another extreme. But I'm sure there were a lot of developers early on that were, just sort of curious about this versus Flow. And I'm curious what you think and if you remember any of these sort of discussions and what was the conclusion. Did TypeScript feel more like what was the benefit for you and for everybody using TypeScript over Flow back then?
Yeah, good to mention Flow, because actually my first project in React Native, I'm not sure if it's also around your time. It was a long time ago, 8 years, so maybe about your time or later. But I actually introduced Flow to the project. I didn't ask TypeScript. Yeah, I was like, I don't want to be this guy that, I'm with the TypeScript guy, so you will use TypeScript. I investigated, thought that Flow is better at this point. It probably was. I think my decision back then was okay. But I think TypeScript won because TypeScript is at least better in many aspects, and also just Microsoft wants it to support it. It's very clear that they are behind it full. They're just behind the language they use it, they put a lot of resources, while actually Flow several years ago after I started using it, they already announced, okay, from Facebook, they announced we're gonna use it mostly for our stuff, and if you want to use it, but we're not gonna support you.
And I think what made me excited about TypeScript was the sort of overall feeling that it was just, I would say, more traditional looking. At least from the types perspective, I think the syntax was more like Java, or just kind of more similar to what let's say, was used from other languages, whereas Flow, with the $sign and all the different things, was slightly different. So I guess that was one thing. But the other one, I'm not sure if you've run into this as well early on, was that Flow had this sort of bad reputation for just accidentally stopping to work, and you would accidentally realize it was not providing the insights, whereas TypeScript just felt more sort of rigid in that sense.
Yeah, TypeScript for sure. The runtime is very focused on providing tooling. There is actually an interesting part that around version 1.2, they rewrite actually the code from something that is pretty cool to write, like full classes and stuff, to something that is actually efficient to run as tooling in IDE. I think that Flow is more focused on scale and basically their stuff, like Facebook stuff. It's not like if Facebook wanted for Flow to win, kind of. I think they could make it. It's not that broken or anything that it's obviously wrong with it, but obviously there can be only one kind of. situation, there is no point in having two standards for sure.
Yeah. And so I guess you sort of briefly highlighted this, but you said that early on TypeScript, like the core concept of TypeScript, and I never thought about it this way, was that it was providing definition files to existing code, letting you enhance that code with types, which I never thought about it this way. I always thought TypeScript is just basically JavaScript with types, and I usually write them inline, but there is obviously the definition file you can provide, sort of together with the code. Is this the correct way to think about TypeScript from the mental model perspective, like you said, or like that was just how it all started?
It's actually more how it ended, because to remind you, if you're mentioning 2016, to tell you what happened in 2012. So the situation with JavaScript is pretty dire. Like at this point, I think ES5 was released, and this is like the most minor release you could think of. Yeah, so 10 years after the previous release, it's such a minor release, and I know I definitely was thinking, oh man, if this is the language I will be using, it better move faster than what's happening. So TypeScript initially was actually two things, very strongly two things in one. One was definitely added types, which is what is happening right now, was the power of it. But another one was supporting new functionality that would be coming to JavaScript at some point, but definitely not coming. You could use already classes and whatever, things that you couldn't actually use in pure JavaScript at this point. Basically, all of these things were added to ES 2015, which obviously was a few years later, and obviously until it proliferates to all the browsers and so on. So another very important part was just using modern features of JavaScript inside. They were very intentional. Actually, another reason why they kind of won, because they weren't too revolutionary. Basically, the types are kind of an add-on. They're designed in a way that you can strip them out, and the new features are not also too revolutionary, like too experimental. They're just what the JavaScript, like the community or what is planned for JavaScript actually. And they were very judicial about what they would add. Like there was nothing too crazy.
I think it is definitely getting closer to that these days, now that TypeScript is sort of moving towards deprecating all non-standard features, right? Like the enums, and we now have this flag in the config, which is, just using types that can be stripped out, which is nicely integrated with Node.js, the latest flag. I also seen the demo of somebody using a TypeScript with the stripped types directly in a browser, which is also very good. So I think the sort of current situation of the project is very close or closely moving towards that vision that you just described. So sort of coming back to the DefinitelyTyped, here's the sort of repo that I'm looking at. And I just wanted to show it to everybody that is, listening to us on YouTube. If not, you can go to YouTube and you will see what we're talking about. So this is the repo where we have all the types. And I think the very first question I have to you is, where does the idea for this come from? And did you even consult this with somebody? I mean, it's like, okay, I decide that we're going to enhance the types with the definitions repo. And did you get inspiration from, I don't know, Ruby or Homebrew, and sort of the idea for a centralized repo came from that place? Or how did you land on this idea in first place?
The idea was actually quite obvious when you start using the language. So TypeScript actually with the distribution came with several definitions of things, but like 5 files or something. It was coming obviously with the DOM definitions, some basic for jQuery. Obviously you would use this maybe basic for Express, but basically that was it. And when you try them, obviously it's very useful. Immediately you're seeing the help you're getting from types and basically kind of a documentation almost of the code you're working with. But also you start using any other library and you see that it's not there. So immediately, just for fun maybe, I was definitely more of a beginner front-end developer. Like I was probably 2 years into front-end, and I was learning a lot of the libraries, and I was like, okay, this would be fun to create at least few definitions. And after creating a few, once I was, okay, this will be a good idea to just have a lot of definitions for the popular libraries. just like that. And basically, the idea is kind of obvious. You need that. Someone has to do that. And TypeScript is not just jumping into super popularity. There is not huge competition. There was a few other guys that had like, oh, here are these 3 or 4 definitions in this repo. Here are these 2 or 3 in another. And I just started for a few months like crazy guy, created 50, 100 definitions, and one of them created a pull request for his. He said, okay, obviously this is the repo that will be, so them joined and so on. Yeah.
You won the initial competition by persistence and just doing too many of them. And where did you get the idea for the initial set of definitions? Is it just your personal projects, or you were like getting feedback from some other people using TypeScript that, hey, this would be pretty cool?
Just whatever was popular or interesting for me.
Right.
I was adding and quickly other pull requests from other people. Yeah.
Nice. So I have to say, I alwa/ took this repo for granted, and I never thought about how it works. I would usually just npm add types / and by the way, this is a very, very good organization name on npm. Was it just available back then, or did you have to reach out to somebody?
Yeah, okay. So to tell you quickly the history and what's the actual status of the library. Yeah, so the initial, I looked to remind myself if what was even the actual facts. I looked to the commits, and it seems like the first few hundred commits, I was just adding more and more on my own. Then for several years, I was literally reviewing hundreds and hundreds of pull requests, merging of other people. So just to clarify, there are a lot of active contributors now. And even back then, quickly it became popular. And this types thing with NPM definitely did come later. The first version was just the repo. You could clone it. And because types are not that big, I mean, it's obviously not optimal. Like even back then, it's not optimal, but also it's not complicated. You clone it, maybe it's a few megabytes, even hundreds of megabytes is better than inventing a new system at this point. But later, actually, several years later, actually this types thing came from Microsoft, because we quickly got contributors also from Microsoft. And like several years in the project, you can think me of just one of the guys, like definitely nothing special about me, because it's very kind of horizontal structure. It's not too complicated as a project, like there doesn't need to be some leader that says this will happen or this will not happen or something like that. So a lot of people actually got involved. And at some point, we actually had something like NPM custom made by one of the contributors, pretty well done. It was called TSD. Even back then I was wondering...
is this... Yeah. So this is where TSD comes from, because I do see this every once in a while, or maybe I confused it with something else, but I think I've seen TSD somewhere like lately, and I was like, okay, this is yet another build system I've never heard of.
Probably it's not that, because it's not that popular anymore, but yeah, that was, for me, it was radical. I was thinking about package managers like something that few people write, and I mean, nowadays, obviously, everyone has a bundler and a packager, but back then I was like, okay, that's too radical. And then another guy actually created another better packager, that's what's called typings, but it was more distributed. In theory, sounded much better, but actually Microsoft was heavily involved, and they had very high stakes if that DefinitelyTyped will work for them, because they actually integrated quite quickly the types from there in Visual Studio. So it would download, I'm not sure how it works right now, but at least back then it would download the types automatically for you and give you that way the hints. But they actually got involved. So this typing thing, types prefix is actually coming from a system that they created that is automatically being run and published to NPM. Basically, they decided that any more complicated system is too complicated, but also you can't work with just a whole one repo that basically it's using the GitHub, like every system in GitHub you can use, but also obviously it's not enough for it.
You're listening to React Universe on Air, your go-to podcast for all things cross-platform with React and React Native. I do have some interesting things to show. While you were giving us this explanation, I did find some stuff. So as you can see, you are, like you say, there is a bunch of different contributors ever since, and everybody has slightly different timeline. But on a grand scheme of things, that diagram may look like not that many contributions because the graph is small, but it is 700 commits. So it is actually quite a lot, especially early on. And I did find the very first commit, which was not easy because I had to click like 50 times to paginate back to the very first commit. So I can see this is true initial commit, just the README. That's what it is. So basically, that's pretty interesting. And like you say, these days there is a lot of things going on. And I guess for people that are familiar, they're mostly familiar with this, which is the way you consume the types. Like you say, came a few years later or sometime later. And it is a very nice automated way to publish those types. I guess, if I'm not wrong, and you sort of highlighted this already, the types are by default looked up by the TypeScript sort of compiler. You don't have to specify the definitions location anymore to point to types prefix, right? That is sort of working out of the box.
Yeah, that was added actually to TypeScript 2, which is probably 8-10 years ago, a long time ago. That's part of the automation that Microsoft did. They decided that, if you have installed types, like prefix types thingy in your project, obviously you want these types to be consumed automatically.
Yeah, that is pretty fun. So I guess, there is quite a lot of things in there. Actually, when I always open up the project and I try going to the types because this is where the things are, it takes quite a while. And like, you cannot even see it all. Like, what is the best way to work with this? Like, how do we maintain it? Like, do you have it like cloned entirely? And then like, if yes, how big is that? I mean, that sounds like a lot of things.
Yeah, you clone it, but it's not that many. I mean, so there are almost 9,000 folders there. That's why GitHub is choking, but they're not that big, the folders themselves. And a lot of it is automation. So the first versions, you can imagine, was very simple. You just get notifications on GitHub. Okay, I need to fix or to review something. But obviously at some scale, and it was very early, that scale, it was already ignorable amount of notifications. So basically there is a bot that goes and sees, okay, there is this thing that needs to be reviewed. These are the contributors that contributed so many lines of code. We'll email them something.
Oh, nice. So it's automated. I was going to ask you, how do you sort of keep up with the changes? Because, we know that JavaScript is ever-moving target, and all these projects, they may not follow Semver, and they may break or may not. And keeping the definitions outside is some sort of a, it puts a burden on you and like the whole crew to keep those up to date. And I guess that seems like quite a challenge or quite a mess at a scale. However, I have to say I've never run into any problems. I mean, I worked with DefinitelyTyped types, and for some of the crazier projects that seem very unpopular, never had a single issue. Seems like a miracle, to be honest, that it was maintainable at such a scale. So do you think, is this because of all the automations you had there? Or maybe at the end of the day, the JavaScript ecosystem is not that breaking on the sort of front-end surface?
Yeah, all of what you mentioned, I say, is correct. Definitely because you're defining the API surface level of the library, it breaks less often, and it's usually documented in the decent libraries, at least. It's documented that something doesn't work. Usually the guys that write the types are people that are using the library currently and just are seeing either issues or just missing types. And it's not that hard. It takes a lot of effort, but it's a combined effort. The benefit is that it's relatively easy to get into writing types. If someone is using a library that has no types, I would very much encourage them to try to write type definitions for that library. It's not that hard.
That's interesting.
It's very useful. It's very useful, yeah.
Did you have, I'm sure you had cases where people say I'm a package library author and I see my types aren't definitely typed, but at some point I decide to migrate my project to TypeScript in first place, which I think is happening even more often these days. Were there cases where people would reach out and be like, can we move this out to my package because I want to take ownership of that? And if yes, is this sort of a normal process that happens every once in a while for DefinitelyTyped?
Yeah, it's normal, but usually it sometimes might happen that the author would have a JavaScript project and would distribute types on his own. And that would be a good idea. I mean, it will be okay idea, but when they actually create a TypeScript project or migrate to TypeScript, then the best case is just to not include, because they're versioned, and it's probably like his version 5 is JavaScript and his version 6 is TypeScript. So we will keep the version 5x in DefinitelyTyped, and then 6 will no longer need the types because it's TypeScript, and the types will be gotten directly from TypeScript. Like, it's a really good thing that's happening right now. That's I think I've not seen any popular library that does not use TypeScript nowadays. Obviously, there are, because the amount of libraries that are covered by DefinitelyTyped is increasing, so I guess there are more. But anything that is worth it is actually using very, very well using the features of TypeScript, not just the extension of the files is TS, but they're using it very well.
Yeah, but that is an interesting insight, that the number of projects in DefinitelyTyped is increasing. I would say one would assume, okay, the types wars are over, TypeScript has won. It's now the default, but seems like not necessarily the case, which I'm not sure what to think about, but it's just an interesting observation, I would say.
Yeah, there will always be these libraries, I guess.
Yeah.
They will never be rewritten, and they will exist, so yeah.
If I understand right, it seems like the sort of way to manage such a large-scale open-source repo is primarily sort of automations. Is that, and I'm from what I'm hearing, you had nice automations for releasing those types and for maintaining. Did I get it right that you had some automation to catch the inconsistencies and like track the latest releases and notify sort of interested parties?
Yeah.
Okay, that is pretty cool. And what about contributions? Say, we often have, getting started guides and stuff like that, but every once in a while, people just send pull requests anyway. Do you remember any PRs in particular where you had to reject something, or maybe say, hey, this is low quality, and anything that comes to your mind after all that time?
So I don't actually have anything that interesting, and that's, I think, a good point. I have with other projects that are unrelated, and I know what you mean. Sometimes someone spent obviously a lot of effort on something and you just need to reject it, or that you can't spend the time to work him through the system. But the good part about these types is that usually they're not that complicated to write. And as long as you want to spend the time, you can probably write them. And sometimes it just takes time to go through the whole documentation or the source code and see what's there. And I mean, it's very beginner friendly. If someone is wondering if they should contribute, they definitely should try.
That's very interesting. So you did a lot of contributions very early on, and sounds like you were happy with all the types ever since. Do you still maintain some relations with, is there a core team behind the project? Do you guys still get in touch? And if I would be interested, what's even on the roadmap for this project? Is it just, tell me more about that. That's pretty interesting.
There are, interestingly, that we know each other almost by just nicknames, kind of, because people come and go, but because there are so many people, but some of them are so dedicated. Like the guy you will see currently at top contributor, Wakame, his nickname has been active for several years, but very, very prolific at this point. And just now it's not, and so on. I mean, that's a good part of the project, that you can just come and contribute, and that's why actually there are so many people that contribute.
I mean, I have to say, there is something cute and amazing about the passion for, I think it's only developers with passion that can be I'm just going to spend all my free time on keeping types for everybody. It's, I can see it being rewarding and relaxing at the same time. Cool. So regarding the sort of project governance itself, we discussed it's a lot of time. You need a lot of time for this, and Microsoft's been using that. Did you have any support from companies or sponsorships? How did you make it sustainable, and any takeaways out of that?
So I would say it very much depends on project per project, because I've definitely been in other projects that this is very much a concern. If it's gonna work, it has to either get sponsorship or something. In this one, I would say almost everything was pretty chill. Everything kind of just worked because there was such a clear benefit to just these types existing. Like almost everyone benefiting. There is no necessarily like battles you don't need to win for this to exist instead of another project. Also, the other thing is you wouldn't necessarily get a big contract if this project wins. Like, this is not some like state management library or enterprise, whatever, something that you will get clients based on that. So we didn't actually ask for any money in anyone, especially initially, because even back then, I guess it's very weird also how you will get the money and then who gets the money, especially the more people are involved. It's tricky. Sometimes it's just better for people to work because they want to. But definitely Microsoft put a lot of, you could say, contribution in terms of efforts. A lot of their developers actually contributed a lot of the infrastructure work, a lot of just work. Like some of the contributors are Microsoft employees. I guess some of them are working because they want to, but some of them because they're paid. So very organically, the support came. It just existed. So we didn't need to invent a way to create that support.
That makes sense. So I guess we know everything about this project now. And, it's so interesting that I only found out about it when you sent me random pull request. And I was like, who's that guy? And then I see the organization that sounds familiar. And I'm like, wow. I mean, the second one was Callstack when I realized, wow, like that is even more fun. Because it's always interesting to see our faces in the wild. So I guess I'm super excited that I found out about it because I think it's a great piece of history. And, I think I should thank you for making my life easier because it always works for me wonders. And TypeScript made my life way, way easier. I'm quite interested about, like from pure TypeScript perspective. We already talked about it and I know you're a huge fan, obviously, as we all are. But what is the sort of best feature of it that you like, or maybe the feature that you don't like the most? If you could shoot some random examples of one of each, that would be great. I'm really interested from somebody who spent so much time in there, what that feature would be.
So they actually, the TypeScript team releases new versions very regularly, so there are new features all the time.
Yes.
So if someone is a fan of just languages and types, they should just very closely follow these. So one feature that I like a lot, and I think not enough developers know about it, is something that is actually introduced a long time ago. It's called discriminated unions. So see, it's not that crazy. If you have to write libraries, then you need to know kind of a lot of crazy typing things. But so discriminated unions, to explain what it is. So usually a union would be you combine several different types and the value can be any one of these types. So it's maybe result from maybe an API call or something. Obviously it can be an error and the form of the error result is different from an OK response. But there is this thing that's called discriminator. It's one value that depending on the value of that property. So for example, imagine something is like status and the status is either OK or an error. So if the status is OK, then you have maybe data property that you can investigate. But if it's an error, there is another property that is like status code, error code, something like that. And the cool part about this, that once you write it, so if you handle the error initially, like, if a status equals error or whatever, then TypeScript already knows that data is defined because we already handled the other case that it is not defined. And you don't need to add these question marks and so on to pretend that. So this is TypeScript gets better and better at understanding what the library does at some more sophisticated level.
Yeah.
And the other cool part, by the way, is that libraries become better at not creating crazy stuff that TypeScript cannot understand. And that's good for us and for everyone, honestly.
Yeah. I wanted to show everybody the only way I know about discriminated unions lately was actually through using Zod for schema, which obviously translates to TypeScript at the end of the day. And the reason I know about it is when you are using OpenAI, for example, structured outputs, and you're passing Zod schema as a response, you cannot have the top level union, and you cannot even have union, but what you can have is discriminated union, and then the discriminator must be present as literal. So that's how I know about it. And it's pretty useful because then, like you say, when you do an if condition on status and you check, for example, if it's success, automatically you have the matching shape, which is pretty exciting and makes it super useful. For some reason, I'm never a fan of writing type assertions. And usually when they don't work for me, I immediately realize that maybe I did something wrong with my types, especially when I'm, sort of switch casing through the object. So that is pretty cool. So I guess I have to agree with you that this is one of the cool features. And I can add one from my side that I learned lately thanks to using ban. I'm not sure exactly if this is the correct config field, but the one that lets me choose what are the package JSON fields to look up when resolving the file. So I can, for example, specify that when you are importing a project, you can look up, from package JSON exports field when I have ban, for example, or source or React Native, use the file that is under that property rather than whatever would be used otherwise, which is pretty cool in monorepo setups where you want to load packages from local file system rather than having to compile them. Great. So Boris, I have to say, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have this throwback, even older than React Native itself, which is for many people, I guess, an ancient history and testament of how old are we these days, even though we don't look like it in the camera flash, I hope. So it's been fun. I mean, I'm super happy. I guess we should now follow you on Twitter and follow you on GitHub and
definitely
sort of be
and
up
soon
to
on
date.
YouTube.
Oh, yes, exactly. As you can see by his professional camera setup, even more professional than this studio. Boris, you're up to starting YouTube channel. Tell us more about it. Like, what's the main theme going to be?
I have to. The only reason I have to is because I need to justify to my wife all the equipment I bought. So I will.
Oh, I know this very well. My wife always says, now you got all this gear. Before you get another one, start using this one. So I totally get you. Cool. So in the details, we will share all the details for Boris, and also, stay tuned for his upcoming YouTube channel. I'm sure it will be great. And before we wrap it up, just a very quick announcement that React Universe Conf, a conference we organize here in Wrocław, is starting to sort of shape up slowly. And we have already announced the first round of speakers. So grab your tickets while they're out there. The early birds are waiting for you. So if you want to meet me and hopefully Boris and the Callstack team, see this office, maybe see this studio in person, React Universe Conf is the conference that you should get your tickets. And yeah, see you in Wrocław, and thanks for listening, and see you in the next episode.